My name is Alina Cole, and I am 28 years old. 5 days before New Year's Eve, my mother called. Her voice carried that practiced, airy lightness, the tone she uses when she's about to sharpen a blade and tell you it's for your own good. "Alina, about New Year," she began. "Lucas thinks it's best if you don't come. He's worked so hard on this project, and he needs the focus to be on him, not your unresolved tension with the family." I stood in my studio apartment, my hand resting on the edge of the mahogany drafting table. The same table where I had spent 3 years designing the safe haven blueprints Lucas was currently calling his own. I didn't remind her that I was the one who designed the project he was celebrating. I didn't mention that unresolved tension was her code for the fact that I had finally stopped smiling when Lucas talked over me. "I understand," I said. That was it, 2 words. My mother's sigh was thick with relief. "Good, we'll do something later, dear, just us." She hung up before I could ask when later would ever come. No Happy New Year. No I'm proud of you. Just the hollow click of a disconnected line. So I spent New Year's Eve with my best friend, Maya. We didn't go to a gala. We sat on her velvet sofa with a bottle of vintage champagne and a stack of legal folders. We listened to the low hum of the city outside and watched the light snow dust the window pane. At midnight, we didn't toast to family or traditions. We raised our glasses to the countdown clock on my laptop, the one time to the exact moment the morning edition of the news would go live. I was 12 when I first realized that my achievements were merely inconveniences for my brother's ego. I had won the regional science fair with a bridge model that could hold 50 times its own weight, a precursor to the architectural dreams I'd eventually realize. I remember standing in the hallway, clutching my blue ribbon, waiting for my parents to come home so I could show them. When the front door opened, I didn't get to speak. Lucas had been cut from the varsity baseball starting lineup that same afternoon. The house immediately pivoted to accommodate his bruised pride. My mother spent the evening making his favorite meal, while my father sat him down to discuss politics and fairness. When I finally held up my ribbon during a lull in the morning of his sports career, my mother didn't even look at the gold lettering. She simply pressed a finger to her lips and whispered, "Not now, Alina. Your brother is having a hard day. Don't make him feel worse by bragging." That became the rhythm of my life. My straight-A report cards were tucked into a drawer because Lucas was struggling with calculus. My promotion to lead designer was celebrated with a "that's nice, dear," before my mother spent 20 minutes detailing the stress Lucas was under as a junior partner. I learned to move through the house like a ghost, keeping my successes quiet so as not to cast a shadow on the golden sun. Lucas didn't just take the spotlight, he consumed it. He had a way of leaning into my space, his eyes scanning my desk for ideas he could tweak or improve. He viewed my talent as a raw resource for his own refinement. "We're a team, Elle," he'd say, flashing that charming, hollow smile. "What's yours is mine, right?" My father, ever the silent accomplice, would nod from the head of the table. "It's about family harmony, Alina. Lucas has a certain presence. He can take your little ideas and make the world see them." The safe haven blueprints were the final test. I had spent years on them, pouring my soul into a vision for urban housing that prioritized dignity over profit. When I showed them to my mother, she didn't see a breakthrough in social architecture. She saw an opportunity for Lucas to secure the municipal contract he'd been chasing. "It's for the family legacy," she had told me, her hand cold on my shoulder. I had looked into her eyes and realized then that I wasn't a daughter to her. I was an unpaid consultant for her favorite child. I went to my room, sat at my drafting table, and began the long, quiet process of documenting every single theft. They thought I was being the good daughter again, retreating into the silence they had built for me. They didn't realize that this time, the silence was where I was building their exit. The Safe Haven project didn't begin in a high-rise office or a sleek boardroom. It began in the damp, gray corners of the city that most people learn to look past. I spent my weekends sketching on transit buses and sitting in public libraries, watching how people without homes sought out warmth and a sliver of privacy. To me, architecture wasn't about the height of a spire or the prestige of a zip code. It was about the psychological weight of a door that actually locks. I called it Safe Haven because I wanted to design a sanctuary for the youth who had slipped through the cracks, The kids who, like me, knew what it felt like to be invisible in their own lives. I obsessed over the details that a developer like Lucas would never notice. I studied the way natural light could reduce cortisol levels and how modular walls could create a sense of ownership in a communal space. Every line I drew on my drafting table was a quiet rebellion against the cold, corporate structures my brother favored. This was my soul work. While Lucas spent his nights networking at country clubs, I was calculating the load-bearing capacity of recycled timber and mapping out sustainable airflow systems. I poured my savings into building a high-fidelity 3D model, a miniature world where everyone was accounted for and no one was pushed to the margins. It was the first time in my life I felt truly powerful, not because I was being heard, but because I was creating something that could speak for those who had been silenced. One rainy Tuesday, my mother stopped by my apartment unannounced. She found me surrounded by schematics and material samples. For a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of genuine curiosity in her eyes as she traced the layout of the central courtyard. "It's beautiful, Alina," she whispered. "It's substantial." I felt that old, dangerous spark of hope ignite in my chest. I thought that maybe, if the work was brilliant enough, it would finally bridge the gap between us. I spent the next hour explaining the technical innovations, the cost-effective materials, and the municipal grants I had researched. I told her how this could change the city. She listened with an intensity I hadn't seen since Lucas's graduation. But as she stood to leave, the warmth in her expression shifted into something calculating. "You know," she said, smoothing her coat, "Lucas has been struggling with his pitch for the city's new development initiative. He has the connections, but he lacks a heart-centered hook. This is exactly the kind of vision he needs to anchor his reputation." The spark in my chest didn't just go out, it turned to ash. I realized then that my mother didn't see my soul work as a masterpiece. She saw it as a donor organ for her son's failing career. The invitation arrived not as a command, but as a plea. My mother called 3 times in one afternoon, her voice trembling with a fragile, manufactured anxiety. "It's just a quiet Sunday dinner, Alina. Your father misses you, and Lucas is so stressed about this city bid. We just want to be a family again. Please, don't be difficult." The word difficult was the hook she always used to reel me in. To Margaret Cole, being difficult meant having boundaries, being good meant being a floorboard. When I arrived at the family home, the air smelled of rosemary and expensive wine, a scent that usually signaled a celebration. But the atmosphere was heavy. Lucas was uncharacteristically quiet, nursing a scotch by the fireplace, looking every bit the tortured visionary. My father sat in his leather armchair, hiding behind a newspaper, his silence acting as the foundation for the performance about to unfold. "I'm just stuck," Lucas lamented halfway through the main course, pushing a piece of roasted lamb around his plate. "The city council wants social impact, but everything my firm develops feels so sterile. If I don't land this contract, the firm might have to downsize. People will lose their jobs, Alina." He looked at me then, his eyes wide and pleading, practicing the same charm he used on investors. My mother reached across the table, her hand covering mine. Her skin was cold despite the warmth of the room. "You have that project, don't you? The little housing thing you showed me. It's exactly what Lucas needs to round out his proposal. It's just a few ideas, Alina. A collaboration between siblings." "It's not a little thing, Mom," I said, my voice steady despite the hammering in my chest. "It's 3 years of proprietary research and design." "We aren't talking about business, Alina," my father interjected, finally lowering his paper. "We're talking about helping your brother. Is your pride really worth more than his career, more than our peace?" The guilt was a physical weight, a familiar shroud they had been draping over my shoulders since I was a child. They made it sound like my refusal was an act of violence against the family unit. Margaret leaned in, her voice a hushed, melodic weapon. "Just bring the tablet, sweetheart. Let him see the flow of the courtyard. We're all on the same team, aren't we?" I looked at the 3 of them, the narcissist, the enabler, and the accomplice, and I felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over me. I knew then that if I didn't show him, I would be the villain of the family for the next decade. but if I did, he would steal it. I stood up and went to my bag. I pulled out the tablet. As I unlocked the screen and saw the safe Haven master files, I caught the reflection of Lucas's face in the glass. He wasn't looking at me with gratitude. He was looking at the screen with the hunger of a man who had finally found something worth taking. The weeks following that dinner were defined by a silence so absolute it felt structural. It began with the digital fade-out. My texts to Lucas, initially asking how the collaboration was progressing, went from instant replies to read receipts with no response, and finally to the gray, hollow status of being ignored entirely. I called his office twice, only to be told by a brisk receptionist that Mr. Cole was in high-level consultations and wasn't taking personal calls. The confirmation of the betrayal didn't come from my family. It came from a push notification on my phone. A local news headline flashed: Cole Associates wins landmark municipal contract for Haven Heights Urban Initiative. I clicked the link, my breath hitching, to see a photo of Lucas standing next to the mayor. Behind them was a digital rendering of my soul work, my modular walls, my sustainable timber, my central courtyard, rebranded under a name that sounded like a luxury condo development. My name was nowhere in the article. When I called my mother, her voice had lost the trembling plea of the dinner party. It was now hard and polished. Lucas is very busy, Alina. This is a massive responsibility. He doesn't have time to walk you through every minor detail of his firm's process. His firm's process? Mom, those are my blueprints, word for word, beam for beam. Alina, don't start, she sighed, the sound of a woman exhausted by a difficult child. We all contributed in our own way. You should be happy for him. Your negativity is exactly why we decided to keep Sunday brunch to just the three of us for a while. Lucas needs a positive environment to focus on the launch. The exclusion was surgical. The Sunday morning texts that had dictated my life for a decade, see you at 11, simply stopped. I spent those first few Sundays in a state of phantom limb syndrome, dressed for a meal I wasn't invited to, sitting in a silence that tasted like copper. I checked social media once and saw a photo Margaret had posted. The three of them at their usual corner table, Lucas grinning, my father's hand on his shoulder, and an empty chair where I used to sit, tucked out of the frame. I wasn't just ghosted, I was being erased. They were moving on with my life's work as if I were a ghost haunting a house they had already sold. But as I sat in my quiet apartment, staring at the photo of their perfect family unit, the paralyzing hurt began to crystallize into something colder and much more durable. They wanted a positive environment. They wanted me out of the way so they could enjoy the spoils of my labor in peace. They didn't realize that by stopping the invitations, they had finally stopped the guilt. I was no longer a daughter trying to be good. I was a woman with nothing left to lose and a digital trail of every file Lucas had ever touched. The erasure was finalized not in a quiet room, but in the neon glare of the city I had tried to help. I was driving toward the downtown core when I saw it, a massive billboard looming over the intersection of 5th and Main. It featured a high-resolution render of the Haven Heights courtyard, the light hitting the recycled timber exactly the way I had modeled it in my studio 3 months ago. In the corner of the display, Lucas's face was plastered twice as large as the building itself. He looked confident, his chin tilted up beneath a bold tagline, a vision of hope, Lucas Cole's gift to the city. I pulled over to the curb, my hands trembling against the steering wheel. Seeing it in person was different than seeing it on a phone screen. It felt like a physical violation, as if he hadn't just stolen my work, but had reached into my mind and plucked out my memories to sell back to the public. I pulled up the project's official website on my phone, scrolling through the architect's statement. My stomach turned as I read the words. It wasn't just the design, it was my voice. He had used my proprietary descriptions word for word. A sanctuary built on the principle of inherent dignity, the text read, where the architecture serves as a silent advocate for the vulnerable. Those were the sentences I had labored over in the middle of the night, weeping into my keyboard while thinking of the kids I had seen sleeping in the subway. Lucas didn't even have the decency to paraphrase. He had simply copied and pasted my soul into his marketing deck. I sat there for a long time, watching the traffic flow beneath his triumphant image. A few hours later, a group text from a distant cousin popped up on my screen, sharing a link to the billboard. "So proud of Lucas. It runs in the family, I guess." My mother had already liked it. In that moment, the last fraying thread of my loyalty snapped. They had taken my silence for granted, assuming that because I had always shrunk myself to fit their needs, I would disappear entirely now that I was no longer useful. They saw me as a ghost, and perhaps I was. But ghosts have a way of making people see things they'd rather ignore. I put the car in gear and turned away from the billboard. I wasn't going home to cry. I was going to Maya's. I had the original timestamps of every file, the metadata from the night of the dinner party, and the recording of the collaboration talk. Lucas wanted the world to see his vision. I was going to make sure they saw everything. Maya's apartment always smelled of sandalwood and brewing espresso, a sharp, grounding contrast to the antiseptic cold of my parents' house. When I walked in, I didn't have to explain the billboard or the stolen words. She simply held up her phone, the Haven Heights press release glowing on the screen, and looked at me with an expression that wasn't pity. It was fury. "He didn't even change the font, Alina," she said, her voice low and dangerous. She walked over and gripped my shoulders, forcing me to look at her. "Stop looking like you've been caught doing something wrong. You are the victim of a heist. They didn't just take your work, they tried to take your identity." For years, my mother had told me I was oversensitive. My father told me I was being dramatic. But Maya looked at the wreckage of my career and called it what it was, a crime. That validation was the first breath of air I'd taken in weeks. "I have the logs," I whispered. "I have the metadata from the night of the dinner." "Good," Maya said, her eyes flashing. "Because family harmony doesn't hold up in court, and neither does a narcissist's ego." She led me to her dining table, where a man I didn't recognize was already seated. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that looked like armor, his face a mask of neutral, professional calm. "Alina, this is Nathan Brooks," Maya said. "He specializes in intellectual property. Specifically, he handles the kind of people who think they're too big to be caught." Nathan didn't offer a sympathetic smile. He didn't offer platitudes about how complicated families could be. He simply opened a leather-bound notebook and looked at me with eyes that saw the world in terms of evidence and liability. "Maya told me about the blueprints," he said, his voice a steady, unsettlingly calm baritone. "And about the municipal contract. If what she says is true, your brother hasn't just committed a breach of trust. He's committed fraud on a civic scale." I sat down, my hands finally still. For the first time, I wasn't a daughter begging for a seat at the table. I was a claimant with a paper trail. Nathan leaned forward, his pen poised. "We have two paths, Alina. We can ask for a settlement and a quiet correction, or we can wait until the spotlight is at its brightest, the New Year's launch, and pull the floor out from under them. One gets you money, the other gets your name back." I thought of the empty chair at Sunday brunch. I thought of my mother's dismissive sigh and Lucas's smug face on the billboard. "I don't want the money," I said, the words feeling like iron in my throat. "I want them to see what happens when the invisible daughter finally speaks." The air in Nathan Brooks's office was filtered and thin, smelling of old paper and expensive air conditioning. He didn't have a view of the city's skyline. Instead, his windows looked out onto the gray, stone architecture of the courthouse, a sobering reminder of where this was headed. On his desk lay a side-by-side comparison of my original files and the official blueprints Lucas had submitted to the city. "It's worse than simple plagiarism, Alina," Nathan said, sliding a document across the desk. It was a forensic audit of the project's digital history. "He didn't just take your designs. He backdated his own files using a ghost server to make it look like his concepts predated your studio work. He also scrubbed your name from the metadata of every shared file from that Sunday dinner." I felt a cold shiver trace my spine. My brother hadn't just been opportunistic, he had been predatory. He had sat across from me, eating my mother's roast lamb and drinking wine, while systematically planning to erase my professional existence. He hadn't just stolen my work, he had tried to make it look like I was the one who might eventually try to steal from him. "But he was sloppy," Nathan continued, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. He missed the hidden digital signatures you embedded in the rendering layers, the ones coded into the sustainable timber specifications. To a city auditor, it looks like his work. To a forensic software expert, it's a confession. The weight of the betrayal felt like a physical pressure in my chest, but Nathan's calm was infectious. He handed me a fountain pen. This is the formal filing for copyright infringement and a request for a dynamic injunction. Once you sign this, we aren't just protecting your work. We are notifying the city that their star developer is a fraud. There is no turning back, Alina. Your family will call this a betrayal. They will say you are destroying your brother. I looked at the signature line. For a second, I saw my mother's face, the way she would look when the news broke. I saw the family harmony she cherished crumbling into dust. But then I looked at the blueprints. I saw the safe haven I had built with my own hands, my own heart, being used as a prop for a man who didn't care about the people inside the buildings, only the name on the plaque. They already destroyed the family, I said, my voice sounding older, harder. I'm just filing the paperwork to acknowledge it. I signed my name. The ink was black and permanent. As I handed the papers back, Nathan nodded once. The trap is set. We'll keep the filing under seal until the New Year's Eve gala. Lucas wants a grand opening. We're going to give him an ending he'll never forget. The invitation never came. I had spent the week watching the city prepare for the gala of the decade, a black tie affair held at the very site where Haven Heights was meant to rise. Massive spotlights had been installed, their white beams sweeping the sky like searchlights, visible even from my small apartment window. On the morning of the 31st, I sat at my kitchen table, a single cup of coffee cooling in my hands. I waited for the phone to ring, for the last-minute reprieve, for the shred of maternal instinct that might realize the cruelty of celebrating a daughter's theft while leaving her in the dark. Instead, my phone buzzed with a text. Alina, the message from my mother read, we've decided it's best if you stay home tonight. This evening is about Lucas's triumph and the future of this family's legacy. Your energy lately has been so heavy, so negative. We don't want any unresolved tension casting a shadow over his big moment. Let's try to have a fresh start in the spring. Happy New Year. I stared at the words until they blurred. Negative. That was the label for my grief. Tension. That was the name for my stolen life. My mother wasn't just disinviting me from a party. She was officially declaring that the version of me that didn't serve Lucas was no longer welcome in her world. I didn't reply. I didn't send a long, weeping paragraph about fairness or love. I simply took a screenshot of the message and forwarded it to Nathan Brooks and Maya. The silence in my apartment felt different now. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the scapegoat anymore. It was the pressurized stillness of a storm front just before the sky breaks open. I walked to my closet and pulled out a simple, elegant black dress, not for a gala, but for a funeral. I wasn't going to the party, but I was going to be the only thing anyone talked about once the clock struck 12. Ready, Maya texted a few minutes later. I looked out the window at the glowing skyline, where the Cole Associates logo was projected onto the side of a skyscraper in shimmering gold. Lucas was currently standing in a room full of the city's elite, accepting handshakes for a vision he had never seen in his own dreams. Ready, I typed back. As I shut off the lights in my apartment, I realized my mother was right about one thing. This was a fresh start, but it wasn't the one she was expecting. The gala was a sea of shimmering silk and forced laughter, a spectacle of excess broadcast live to every screen in the city. From Maya's couch, I watched the peripheral feed. Lucas stood on a stage draped in velvet, a microphone in one hand and a crystal award in the other. He looked exactly like the man our mother had raised him to be, a king built on a foundation of stolen soil. My parents stood just behind him, Margaret's face glowing with the reflected light of her son's stolen glory. To a new era of architecture, Lucas announced, raising his glass. To Haven Heights. At that exact moment, the countdown clock in the corner of the screen hit 0. The transition was seamless and brutal. The live feed of the gala didn't cut away. Instead, it split. On the right, Lucas was still smiling. On the left, the composed, devastating face of Daniel Harper appeared. He wasn't at the gala. He was in the newsroom, standing in front of a digital display that featured my original blueprints side by side with Lucas's vision. Tonight, as the city celebrates the launch of Haven Heights, Harper's voice cut through the party noise, a massive legal injunction has just been served. Investigative documents obtained by this station suggest that the visionary design we are celebrating tonight may not belong to Lucas Cole at all. I watched the screen as the split feed captured the moment the news reached the ballroom. A sea of phones began to glow as guests received the same news alert. The music didn't stop, but the atmosphere curdled. I saw my mother's head tilt, her brow furrowing as she looked at her own phone. I saw the color drain from Lucas's face as Daniel Harper began to read the metadata timestamps aloud, the digital fingerprints I had left behind like breadcrumbs. The claimant, Elena Cole, Harper continued, his voice like a gavel, has filed a suit alleging total intellectual property theft. The city has already issued a statement. All contracts with Cole Associates are suspended effective immediately, pending a fraud investigation. The camera at the gala zoomed in. The golden child looked small. The lights that had been meant to crown him now felt like interrogators' lamps. He looked toward the wings of the stage, searching for my mother, for my father, for anyone to tell him how to spin this. But for the first time in his life, the silence he had forced upon me had become his own. Maya reached over and squeezed my hand. We didn't cheer. We didn't shout. We just sat in the quiet of her living room, watching the image of my family crumble in high definition. The ball dropped in Times Square, but in our city, the only thing that fell was the house of cards Margaret Cole had spent 30 years building. The sun rose on New Year's Day with a cold, piercing clarity. I was sitting in my kitchen, the city's skyline finally stripped of the Cole Associates' golden projection, when my phone began to scream. It was Lucas. Elena, pick up." His voice was a jagged wreck, stripped of its practiced charm. "What did you do? Why is Daniel Harper talking about you on the news? You have to call Nathan Brooks and tell him this was a mistake. A misunderstanding. The city is pulling the contract, Elle. I'm ruined. My firm is done." "It wasn't a mistake, Lucas," I said, my voice as level as a horizon line. "It was an audit. You wanted the world to see your vision, and now they have, every single layer of it." "But we're family," he shrieked, the sound of a man who had never been told no. "Mom is losing her mind. You're destroying us." "No," I replied softly. "I'm just stopping you from destroying me." I hung up, and immediately the screen lit up with my mother's name. I let it ring for 3 beats before answering. There was no dear this time. No family harmony. "How could you be so selfish?" Margaret hissed, her voice trembling with the rage of a queen whose throne had been set on fire. "After everything we gave you, you've humiliated us in front of everyone. Your father can't even show his face at the club, all because you couldn't let your brother have one night of success." "You didn't give me anything, Mom," I said, looking at the box of files Maya had helped me organize. "You gave Lucas my work and you gave me the bill for it. You wanted a fresh start in the spring. Well, I'm taking it early." "You'll be alone, Elena," she threatened. "Don't come crawling back when you realize you have no one." "I've been alone in your house for 28 years, I said. "This is the first time I've actually felt like I have company." I blocked her number before she could reply. I blocked them all. 2 hours later, I met Maya at a small, sun-drenched office space in the historic district, the kind of place with exposed brick and windows that actually opened. Nathan Brooks was already there, holding a key. The city hadn't just canceled Lucas's contract. They had contacted Nathan to express interest in working with the actual designer of the Safe Haven project. I walked to the center of the room and placed my old drafting table by the window. For the first time, I wasn't designing in the shadows or hiding my blueprints in a drawer. I picked up my pencil, the weight of it familiar and right. Outside, the city was waking up to a new year, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't a ghost in its story. I was the architect,